Africa. We're joined, I'm pleased to say, here in the studio by Georgia Gardner-Smith. Over to you while I try and find my tongue.
Thanks very much, Mark. Okay, we're going to actually start off with, excuse me, Burkina Faso and a hard-fought peace deal struck there between Mali's government and Tuareg MNLA separatists. The two sides have been holding negotiations in Ouagadougou and today agreed to a ceasefire that will allow the military to return to the occupied city of Kidal and pave the way to elections next month.
10 days of tough talking in the Burkina Faso capital, Ouagadougou, to bring about this immediate ceasefire deal between the MNLA and Bamako. Mali's chief negotiator announced agreement on all outstanding issues on Tuesday, enabling an interim accord to be signed.
We agree on the basics that there's a consensus, a Malian international consensus, on the key issues which are the integrity of the national territory, national unity, the secularist and republican form of the state, and the need for Mali to exercise sovereignty over every square centimetre of its territory.
The initial deal sees the Malian army re-enter the town of Kidal, currently occupied by Tuareg separatists, to secure the planned July the 28th presidential poll. The text also requires the deposit of weapons by the armed groups within 10 days and for them to stay in barracks. The integrity of the elections is viewed as key to Mali's recovery from over a year of upheaval. A power vacuum following a March 2012 coup in Bamako allowed first Tuareg separatists and then al-Qaeda-linked Islamists to take over swathes of northern Mali. In January, France engaged to drive out the Islamists, but the MNLA have tried to hold Kidal. In a statement, the French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius described the preliminary deal as a breakthrough. France and the UN will supervise implementation of the interim agreement. 60 days after the election, the new president of Mali must then begin peace talks to define the status of the northern region of Kidal.
Well, Andrew Leibovich is a specialist in West African policy at the New American Foundation. He joins us from Los Angeles. Andrew, thanks very much for speaking to us. Now, the disarming of rebels, transferring them to barracks, returning the army back to Kidal, there is actually still a lot of delicate decisions still to be made. What's the likelihood that this deal will actually hold?
Well, that's something that I think a lot of people are concerned about and some are very skeptical about at the moment. As you said, in some ways, the major issues remain outstanding, and this deal is necessary to be able to have elections, but we're still kicking many of these issues down the road 2 months after a new president's elected. There's a lot that remains unresolved.
So how much of this is even possible to be achieved before elections next month? It really is cutting it pretty fine.
It's cutting it very tight, not just in terms of security in the north, but there are many issues in southern Mali and throughout the country that have yet to be fully resolved, related to electoral lists, to the distribution of electoral cards, to dealing with displaced populations, and that's just to be able to hold elections throughout the country, setting aside the political and security issues that are specific or more specific to northern Mali. So it's going to be cutting it very close regardless, but yes, this deal certainly comes at a very late moment.
Now, the months of turbulence that Mali suffered all came off the back of a Tuareg insurgency. They've been calling for their own separate territory. Where does this deal leave those hopes for a separate, if not for a separate state, for at least autonomy?
Well, the first thing to point out is that the MNLA does not represent all Tuareg, let alone all residents of northern Mali. And that's another important point about these talks, is that the parties at these talks do not represent all of the armed groups, do not represent all members of the armed groups, and certainly, as I said, do not represent all Tuareg or all Arabs or all other residents of northern Mali. So I'm personally concerned that this deal may not accomplish very much, in large part just because there are still a number of people who have not had their say in this process, and that could lead to further problems down the road.
Well, thanks very much. Andrew Leibovich there, speaking to us from Los Angeles. Okay, in other news, the International Criminal Court has pushed back the preliminary hearing of evidence against an African warlord known as the Terminator. The confirmation of charges hearing of Bosco Ntaganda was set for September, but has been pushed back to February 10th next year. It's key to judges' decision on whether to put the Rwandan on trial. He faces multiple charges, including the use of child soldiers, murder, rape, and slavery. All this during the early 2000s, as he spent time as a rebel leader in the east of Democratic Republic of Congo. Meanwhile, the ICC has agreed to let Kenya's deputy president off attending parts of his crimes against humanity trial. That starts in September, and the court has granted William Ruto permission to be absent so that he can better carry out his duties as deputy leader. He'll have to be present for certain witnesses, key statements, and, of course, when judgment is handed down. Ruto and President Uhuru Kenyatta have been charged over their roles in deadly post-electoral violence in 2007 that claimed over 1,000 lives. Okay, now in Nigeria, survivors of an attack on a school in Maiduguri in which 9 pupils were killed say that the gunmen were Boko Haram. Just a day earlier, the jihadist group was also accused of shooting dead 13 people at another school in the troubled northeast. Attacks by Boko Haram, which means Western education is sacrilege, have killed over 1,000 civilians since 2010. Despite a government crackdown on the sect, the UN's warned that the violence has led to at least 9,000 refugees. Officials in the country are also worried about a potential food shortage. Around 19,000 rice farmers have reportedly been chased off their land by militants. Well, for more on the situation in Nigeria, I'm joined by William Spindler from the UN's Refugee Agency. William, thanks very much for coming in. Now, according to Nigerian authorities, they've got a handle on this. A state of emergency was declared in May, and they've really been pushing the success of this crackdown on Boko Haram, but clearly people still feel the need to leave.
That's right. People are still leaving Nigeria. More recently, in the last week, some 3,000 Nigerians have fled to Cameroon. And in the past few weeks, about 6,000 others have left Nigeria for Niger. And a few more have gone to Chad. So people are fleeing because they feel unsafe. They tell us that in some cases they're fleeing actual fighting. In other cases, they flee because they hear gunshots and they are scared. And we have also heard from some refugees that their houses have been destroyed, and that's the reason why they have fled the country.
And some of the damage is actually as a result of the state's military crackdown on Boko Haram itself.
It's very difficult for us to assess, what is happening in northern Nigeria, because we have no access to these areas. They are unsafe, and humanitarian organizations can't simply go there. Even the areas in the neighboring countries where refugees are fleeing to, for instance, northern Cameroon, are also quite unsafe. This is the area where in February a French family was kidnapped. And our colleagues have been able to reach this area, but obviously we face lots of security problems, and we're trying to move the refugees away from these dangerous border areas, further away from the border, so that we can provide assistance to them. But the situation inside Nigeria is very worrying. People are still living, and also people are being displaced within Nigeria.
So with the government's focus so much on Boko Haram, has any assistance come from the government itself in terms of dealing with the effect on refugees, on civilians caught up in the middle of all this?
Well, we are liaising with a government agency called the National Emergency Management Agency that is responsible for relief efforts inside Nigeria. And we and other humanitarian organizations are trying to see what can be done to help the civilian population. And we will take part in some interagency assessment missions that hopefully will go to these areas soon, if the security allows it.
Earlier you said that there's been some difficulty in getting a full picture of the situation on the ground in Nigeria. Is that because there's been quite a tight grip on the kind of information that's coming out of the country in terms of the battle between the military and Boko Haram?
Yes, well, there's very little information coming out from this area simply because journalists are not present. Humanitarian activity is restricted. It's very difficult, if not impossible. And so we are not getting the full picture. Also, communications have been affected, and it's very difficult to get any information coming out from there because we simply cannot communicate with the people who are there.
Well, thank you very much, William Spindler from the UN's Refugee Agency, joining us here at France 24. Well, that's it from me, but join us again. I will clearly be back again tomorrow with you, Mark.
Excellent, Georgia. Thank you very much, Mr. Spindler. Thank you too for joining us here in the studio. Pleasure to see you. Stay with us. We're taking a very short break after that. More news, all the sport and our special focus on life in Bangui. Stay with us.